The morning came gray and heavy over Harlan's Creek, the kind of morning that sits on your chest before you even get out of bed. A thin fog clung to the low fields, drifting between the fence posts like something that didn't want to leave. Russell Dale Morrow stood on the sagging porch of the farmhouse, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand, staring out at the land his grandfather had left him, 42 acres of eastern Kentucky soil that had fed 3 generations and was now, slowly and without mercy, being taken away. He was 44 years old. His boots were worn through at the left heel. The flannel shirt he wore had a small tear near the second button that he kept meaning to fix and never did. His face carried the kind of lines that don't come from age alone. They come from worry, from years of watching the numbers not add up, from learning to sleep next to a silence that used to be filled by someone else's breathing. The farm was called Morrow Hollow, not officially, not on any county map or deed, but that's what people in Harlan's Creek had called it for as long as anyone could remember. Russell's grandfather, Clarence Earl Morrow, had built the main barn in 1959 with wood he milled himself, had sunk the first fence posts by hand, had planted the eastern field with tobacco, when tobacco still meant something in this part of the state. Now the barn leaned slightly to the left. The eastern field hadn't been planted in 6 years. And the envelope Russell had received 3 weeks ago from First Heritage Bank of Cumberland County sat on the kitchen table, folded and unfolded so many times the creases were soft as cloth. 90 days, it said, to resolve the outstanding balance or surrender the property. He took a sip of the cold coffee and made a face. Behind him, the screen door opened with its familiar creak, and his daughter, Paige, stepped out. She was 17, lean and sharp-eyed like her mother had been, with dark hair she kept pulled back in a practical braid. She was wearing her school backpack and holding a piece of toast she hadn't bitten into yet. "You're up early," she said. "Didn't sleep much." She stood beside him and looked out at the same fog, the same gray fields. "You get another call from the bank?" "No, just thinking." Paige didn't say anything. She was smart enough to know when her father was lying and kind enough not to push it. She bit her toast, chewed slowly, looked out at the muddy pond sitting at the far edge of the property, a wide, stagnant pool that had been there so long nobody really looked at it anymore. It was fed by a seasonal creek that had mostly dried up, leaving behind a flat acre of dark mud and standing water that smelled like iron in the summer heat. Mr. Clifton at school said that kind of bottomland sells for almost nothing, Paige said. The wet acre. He'd be right. But it's still an acre. Russell looked at her. She looked back at him with those steady eyes that always made him feel slightly outmatched. "I'll figure something out," he said. "I know you will," she said, and kissed him on the cheek before heading down the porch steps toward the gravel road where the school bus would come in 20 minutes. He watched her go and felt the particular pain of a father who knows his child is trying to protect him. The man from the bank was named Gregory Allen Fitch. He was 38, drove a Chevy Silverado that was too clean for the roads around Harlan's Creek, and wore a fleece vest with the bank's logo embroidered on the chest in gold thread. He had the careful smile of someone professionally trained to deliver bad news without seeming responsible for it. He came that Tuesday afternoon, parked on the gravel between the house and the barn, and walked over to where Russell was replacing a section of fence rail along the south pasture. Russell saw him coming and kept working until Fitch was close enough to speak to. "Mr. Morrow, I appreciate you seeing me." "Didn't have much choice," Russell said without turning around. Fitch cleared his throat. "I want to be straightforward with you. The bank has been patient. 3 extensions over the past 2 years. The loan modification in 2023, but the board has made a final decision, and I'm here to give you the official timeline." Russell set down the fence rail and turned around. He was a full head taller than Fitch and broader through the shoulders, and he noticed how the man took a half step back without meaning to. 90 days, Russell said. "I read the letter. Yes, but there may be options. Fitch reached into his vest pocket and produced a folded brochure. There are buyers currently interested in agricultural land in Cumberland County. Developers, if you agree to a voluntary sale, you could potentially walk away with some equity after the loan is settled. Enough to what? Fitch paused. Start over. Somewhere else. Russell looked at the brochure. On the cover was a photograph of a smiling family standing in front of a new suburban house. He looked at it for a long moment. This land has been in my family for 67 years, he said quietly. My grandfather broke his back on this ground. My father's buried in the churchyard 2 miles up that road, and he spent 40 years farming this place. He handed the brochure back to Fitch. I'm not starting over somewhere else. Fitch tucked the brochure back into his pocket. Mr. Morrow, I understand, I truly do, but without a significant payment toward the principal by August. I heard you the first time. A silence settled between them, filled with birdsong and the distant sound of a tractor on a neighboring property. I'll be in touch, Fitch said, and walked back to his clean silver truck. Russell watched him drive out. Then he turned and looked at the farm, the leaning barn, the untended field, the muddy pond sitting flat and dark in the afternoon light, and felt something shift inside him. Not hope, exactly. More like the cold, focused clarity that comes when a man realizes he has nothing left to lose. That night, after Paige was in bed, Russell sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen and started writing down every option he had. The list was short. He crossed out 3 of them before he finished writing them. What remained was a single line at the bottom of the page. Drain the wet acre. Sell something. He stared at it for a long time. The wet acre, that low-lying muddy pond at the back of the property, had been unusable for as long as Russell could remember. As a child, he'd been told to stay away from it. His grandfather Clarence had said the ground around it was unstable, that things sank into that mud and didn't come back up. As a teenager, Russell had thought that was just old man talk. As an adult, he'd simply ignored the pond, the way you ignore a problem that has no solution. But land was land. Even bad land. Even mud, if he could drain it, run a drainage trench to the dry creek bed, pump the standing water out, he might be able to sell the acre separately. Maybe $2,000, maybe $3,000. Not enough to save the farm, but enough to buy time. And right now, time was what he was selling. He called his neighbor and oldest friend, Dennis Ray Pruitt, at 7 the next morning. Dennis was 51, a compact and perpetually sunburned man who ran a small equipment rental business out of a metal building on Route 9. He had known Russell since they were boys, had stood beside him at his wedding, had helped carry his father's casket. He was the kind of man who showed up when you called and didn't ask for explanations. I need a pump and some pipe, Russell said, and maybe a weekend. What are you draining? The back pond. A pause. Clarence's pond. It's my pond now. Another pause. I'll bring the pump Saturday morning, Dennis said, and I'll bring coffee, because that's going to be a long day. Saturday came with a clear sky and a cool breeze off the ridge. Dennis showed up at 7:15 with a flatbed trailer carrying a centrifugal pump, 200 feet of 4-inch discharge pipe, and a thermos of black coffee that could strip paint. They spent the first hour laying pipe from the pond's edge down to the dry creek bed that ran along the property's western boundary, a distance of about 160 feet through scrubby brush and soft ground. The pump was gas-powered and loud. When Dennis pulled the cord and it caught, the noise was enormous in the morning quiet, a clattering mechanical roar that sent a crow spiraling up from a nearby oak tree. The water began to move. It came out dark brown at first, almost black, thick with sediment and the smell of organic decay. It ran down through the pipe and spread out across the dry creek bed, soaking into the gravel and the dead leaves. Slowly, so slowly, it was almost imperceptible, the surface of the pond began to drop. Russell and Dennis sat on a fallen log at the edge and drank their coffee and didn't talk much. The pump did the talking. By 10 o'clock, the pond had dropped perhaps 8 inches. The edges had begun to recede, revealing a rim of gray-black mud that glistened in the morning light. A rusted fence post emerged near the north bank, standing at an angle, trailing a scrap of wire, an old tire, a concrete block. "Place is a time capsule," Dennis said. By noon they had dropped it nearly 2 feet. The center of the pond was still submerged, but the shallow edges had become a broad flat of black mud, cracked in places where it was beginning to dry. Russell walked along the bank, prodding the ground with a long stick, checking the consistency. He was near the northeast corner of the pond, the deepest side, where the ground sloped down before leveling out, when the stick hit something solid beneath the mud. He stopped. He pushed the stick down again, 4 inches to the right, solid. 5 inches to the left, solid. He pushed it deeper and felt a different resistance, something large, something that went on farther than a rock would. "Dennis," he called. Dennis came over and Russell showed him where the stick was going in. "Something buried there," Russell said. "Old equipment, probably. People dump all kinds of things in ponds. It's big." They looked at each other. "Keep the pump running," Russell said. They let the pump run through the afternoon, and by 4 o'clock the pond was nearly empty. Just a shallow basin of standing water in the very center, surrounded by a flat acre of dark, trembling mud. The smell was deep and rich and ancient, the smell of ground that hadn't seen air in decades. And there, in the northeast corner where the mud was deepest and the ground had settled in a long rectangular mound, the shape of something massive was emerging. Curves of steel, a wheel, the ghost of a hood arching up through the black mud like the back of a sleeping animal. It was a tractor. Russell stood at the edge of the mud and stared at it. His heart was doing something strange, not racing exactly, but moving in an uneven rhythm, the way it did when something important was happening, and his body understood it before his mind did. "That's an old one," Dennis said softly. "Look at the line of that hood. That's late 50s, maybe early 60s. "My grandfather had a tractor," Russell said. "A John Deere 730. He talked about it all the time when I was a kid. Said it was the best machine he ever owned." He paused. "Said it disappeared one winter. Said it must have rolled into the pond during a flood." Dennis was quiet for a moment. "You ever believe that?" Russell looked at the shape in the mud. "I was 8 years old. I believed everything he told me." The sun was going down behind the ridge, throwing long orange shadows across the empty pond. The tractor sat half submerged in mud that had held it for more than 50 years, patient and still, as if it had been waiting. "We'll need the skid steer to pull it out," Dennis said. "Ground's too soft to walk on right now. We go in there, we sink to our knees. Monday," Russell said. "We pull it Monday." He stood there a while longer after Dennis went to shut down the pump. The light faded. The mud turned from gray-brown to black. The shape of the tractor dissolved back into the darkness. But Russell didn't move for a long time. Because something his grandfather had said to him, something he hadn't thought about in 30 years, had surfaced in his mind with the sudden, startling clarity of something rising out of mud. "Some things are better off buried, Russell. The ground keeps secrets better than people do." Monday arrived with low clouds and the threat of rain that never quite materialized. By 8 in the morning, Dennis had brought over his skid steer on the flatbed, and together he and Russell laid down a path of old wooden pallets across the mud to distribute their weight as they worked closer to the tractor. The machine was extraordinary in its ruin. 50-plus years of submersion in anaerobic mud had preserved it in a strange, terrible way. The steel was deeply corroded and caked in black sediment, but the basic structure was intact. 4 massive tires, now deflated and cracked but still attached to the rims, the distinctive arch of a John Deere 730 hood, a seat that had rusted to a flat orange plate, and the engine compartment sealed by decades of mud packing into every gap and joint. Dennis hooked chains to the rear axle and to the front drawbar, running them back to the skid steer. They worked slowly and carefully, testing the tension, not wanting to tear the old machine apart. "Ready?" Dennis called from the cab. "Go slow," Russell said, standing to the side with his boots sinking slightly into the mud with each step. The skid steer engine revved. The chains pulled taut. For a moment, nothing happened. The mud held with a grip that was almost possessive, an unwillingness to give up what it had claimed. And then there was a deep, sucking sound like a great exhale, and the tractor began to move. It came out of the mud in stages, first the rear wheels breaking free with a sound like cannon fire, then the frame lifting, tilting, and finally the front end pulling clear with a long, slow groan that seemed to come from the machine itself. Mud cascaded off it in sheets. Water ran from every joint and seam. The tractor was a dark, dripping monument, unrecognizable as any color, coated uniformly in black mud from tire to hood. Dennis set it down on the pallet path and killed the skid steer engine. They both stood there looking at it. "Lord," Dennis said. Russell walked around it slowly. The tractor was a John Deere 730. Just as he had thought, he could make out the model number pressed into the metal of the side panel. And the distinctive shape of the hood was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking for. A 1958 or 1959 model. A row crop configuration built for the kind of farming his grandfather had done. He found himself thinking about Clarence, a big-shouldered, quiet man who smelled of pipe tobacco and machine oil, who had a habit of running his thumb along the brim of his hat when he was thinking, who had died of a stroke in 1987 when Russell was just 6 years old. Russell barely remembered him. What he knew of his grandfather came from stories, his father's stories, mostly told in the way that families compress a man's whole life into a handful of moments. He laid his hand on the hood of the tractor. The steel was cold through the mud, solid, real. "Help me open it," he said. The hood latches were corroded solid. They spent 20 minutes with penetrating oil and a hammer, and 2 pry bars working them loose, the metal groaning and protesting before the hood finally released. It came up with a shriek of rust against rust, and they caught it before it could fall backward off its hinges. The engine compartment was packed with mud, a solid mass of black sediment that had seeped in through every gap over the decades. The engine itself was buried beneath it. Russell began working at the mud with a flat spade, clearing it away carefully, the way you might clear debris from something fragile. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He told himself he wasn't looking for anything, that he was just curious, that it was natural to want to see the machine that had been the centerpiece of one of his grandfather's most told stories. He cleared the left side of the engine block, then the right, then the front. The mud came out in dense, wet chunks piling up on the pallet beside the tractor. Then his spade hit something that wasn't mud and wasn't engine. He stopped, used his hands, brushed carefully with his fingers. Metal, flat, rectangular. He cleared the mud away in careful strokes, working from the edges inward, and what emerged was a metal box, the kind of old military surplus ammunition box. Olive drab steel with a rubber gasket seal around the lid, roughly the size of a shoebox. It had been wedged between the engine block and the left side of the engine compartment, hidden deliberately in the one place that would be invisible under a closed hood. Russell stared at it. Dennis, who had been watching from the side, came closer. Neither of them said anything. Russell gripped the lid handle and pulled. The gasket held for a moment, swollen and compressed by decades of pressure, and then gave way with a soft pop. The lid opened. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had protected them from the moisture, were 3 items. The first was a bundle of paper documents, folded and bound with a rubber band that disintegrated when Russell touched it. He unfolded the top sheet carefully. It was a deed, a land deed, handwritten in formal legal language, dated September 14, 1961. Describing a parcel of land in Cumberland County, Kentucky. The name on the deed was not Clarence Earl Morrow. It was Harold Eugene Caldwell. The second item was a hand-drawn map on yellowed paper, a topographical sketch of what appeared to be a section of land in Cumberland County, with measurements marked in pencil and a series of notations in his grandfather's handwriting that Russell recognized from old letters. The map showed Morrow Hollow and the surrounding properties, but also a section of land to the east, land that currently belonged to the Caldwell family, one of the oldest and most powerful families in the county. The third item was a roll of cash. Russell counted it with hands that were not entirely steady. $140 in old bills, not a fortune, not even close. But the bills were from the early 1960s, crisp and preserved, and they had clearly been placed there deliberately along with the documents. Russell sat back on his heels in the mud, the open box in his lap, and tried to understand what he was looking at. Dennis read over his shoulder. A long silence stretched between them. "Russell," Dennis said finally, "do you know what this is?" "A deed," Russell said, "for Caldwell land, for land that's worth." Dennis stopped, shook his head. "The Caldwell's eastern parcel. That's the parcel they've been negotiating to sell to the Lexington Development Group. I heard the number last month at the co-op." He looked at Russell steadily. $4.2 million. The clouds shifted overhead. A bar of cold sunlight fell across the mud and the tractor and the open metal box. Russell looked down at the deed in his hands. The paper was fragile but intact. The ink was faded but legible. Harold Eugene Caldwell's name was clear. He thought about his grandfather hiding this box, hiding the entire tractor, the machine he loved best, to make sure it stayed hidden. "Some things are better off buried, Russell. What does this mean?" he said, though he already knew the answer was not going to be simple. "It means," Dennis said slowly, "that your grandfather knew something about this land, something somebody very powerful didn't want known. The Caldwell family had been in Cumberland County since before the Civil War. They were not wealthy in the way that coastal money is wealthy, not flashy, not loud, but in the deep, structural way that old land wealth works in rural Kentucky. They owned things. They owned the feed store on Main Street in Harlan's Creek. They owned 300 acres of the best bottomland in the county. 2 of them had served as county judges. 1 had been state legislature. The current patriarch was Franklin Boyd Caldwell, 73 years old, a widower who lived in a large brick house on the Caldwell home place east of town and who served on the board of First Heritage Bank of Cumberland County, the same bank that held Russell Morrow's loan. Russell didn't know this yet when he left the farm on Monday evening with the metal box locked in the cab of his truck. He didn't know it when he sat at the kitchen table that night and spread the documents out under the good lamp and read them 3 times, carefully, looking for something that would tell him what they meant and why his grandfather had gone to such lengths to conceal them. What he found on the 3rd reading was a handwritten note on the back of the deed, 4 lines in his grandfather's careful print. "HC sold this land to me fair and bought it back dirty. Witnesses saw, witnesses were bought. Keeping this until the right time or the right man." He sat with that for a long time. Then he called the one person he trusted to help him understand what he had. Sylvia Ann Mercer was 52 years old and had been practicing property law in Cumberland County for 24 years. She had a small office of the hardware store on Main Street, drove a 10-year-old Subaru, and had a reputation for taking on cases that larger firms wouldn't touch. She had handled Russell's father's estate when he died, and had done it honestly and without overcharging a man she knew couldn't afford much. She answered when Russell called at 8:30 that evening, which told him she was still working. "I need to show you something," he said. "Tomorrow if you can." Something in his voice made her not ask questions over the phone. 8:30 in the morning, she said. "Bring coffee." He arrived at her office at 8:25 with 2 cups from the gas station and the metal box under his arm. Sylvia met him at the door, a compact, serious woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the unhurried manner of someone who had heard most things twice. She read the deed and the note in silence. She studied the map for several minutes, turning it under the lamp, cross-referencing the notations against her own knowledge of the county's land records. Then she set everything down, folded her hands on the desk, and looked at Russell. "Do you know what adverse possession is?" she asked. "No, it's a legal principle. In Kentucky, if a party openly occupies and uses a piece of land without the owner's permission for a continuous period of 15 years, they can claim legal title to it." She tapped the deed. "This is a bill of sale. Your grandfather bought this parcel, 6 acres on the eastern boundary, from Harold Caldwell in 1961. If that sale was legitimate and was never legally voided, it's possible the title to those acres has been in your family's name for 60+ years." Russell stared at her. 6 acres. The same 6 acres that are currently included in the Caldwell family's development deal with the Lexington Group. She paused. "If this deed is valid, and I'm not saying it is, there are a great many things to verify. It could mean that Franklin Caldwell is attempting to sell land he doesn't legally own." The room was very quiet. Outside, a truck went by on Main Street. "And if it is valid," Russell said. "Then you have a claim," Sylvia said. "And that claim, in the middle of a $4 million development deal, is worth a great deal of leverage." She looked at him carefully. "Russell, do you understand what I'm saying? And do you understand what will happen when the Caldwells find out this box exists?" Russell understood. He had understood since the moment he read his grandfather's note the night before. "How long do you need to research it?" he asked. "A week? Maybe 2. She began gathering the documents back into the box, then stopped. "Does anyone else know about this?" He thought about Dennis. "One person. Someone I trust." "Keep it that way," she said. "And, Russell," she looked at him over the top of her reading glasses, "be careful. The Caldwells have been in this county for 150 years. They know where every body is buried." She paused, seeming to hear the metaphor, figuratively speaking. The call came on a Thursday morning, 11 days after Russell had left the documents with Sylvia. He was in the barn replacing a section of roof tin when his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. A 606 area code. Local. Mr. Morrow. The voice was older, measured with the particular smoothness of a man who had spent a lifetime talking people into things. "This is Franklin Caldwell. I think it's time we had a conversation." Russell set down the tin snips. His heart rate went up by perhaps 10 beats, but his voice stayed level. "Mr. Caldwell, I've heard you've been doing some work on your back property, draining that old pond." A pause that was not entirely casual. "Finding things." "People talk in a small town," Russell said. "They do," Caldwell agreed pleasantly. "I'd like to invite you to come by the house this evening, 6 o'clock. I think we have some things to discuss that would be to our mutual benefit." Russell looked up through the gap in the barn roof at the gray sky above. "I'll be there," he said. He called Sylvia from the truck. "He knows," she said immediately. "How? I don't know. But it doesn't surprise me." Her voice was tight but controlled. "Russell, don't go alone. I'm not going to bring Dennis into this. I'm not talking about Dennis. I'm talking about me. A beat. I'm your attorney. I have every right to be present at any meeting involving property claims I'm researching on your behalf. And frankly, having me there will limit what he thinks he can say to you." He agreed, and they drove out to the Caldwell place together that evening in Russell's truck. Sylvia with a leather portfolio on her lap. Russell with his hand steady on the wheel, and a feeling in his chest like standing at the edge of something high. The Caldwell home place was impressive in the way that old Kentucky farm estates are impressive, not grandiose, but deeply, quietly substantial. The brick house was large and well-maintained, surrounded by ancient oak trees and a white board fence that ran along the road for a quarter mile. There were horses in the near pasture. The driveway was gravel, but the good kind, thick and well-graded, not the potholed kind that Russell drove every day. Franklin Caldwell met them on the front porch. He was a tall man, slightly stooped now with age, but still with the posture of someone who had been physically commanding in his youth. His hair was white and full, his face deeply lined but not unkind looking. He was wearing pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, no tie. the studied casualness of a man who wanted to appear unthreatening. He shook Russell's hand first, then turned to Sylvia with a fractional hesitation. "Sylvia," he said. "Franklin," she said. They had obviously met before. Something moved between them that Russell couldn't quite read. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and furniture Polish. They sat in a formal living room with leather chairs and a fireplace that had a fire going despite the mild evening. A fire that Russell understood was for effect. A woman, presumably a housekeeper, brought coffee without being asked. Caldwell folded his hands over his knee and looked at Russell with the steady, patient attention of a man who had waited this long and could wait longer. "I'll be direct," he said. "I know you found a document box in that tractor. I know it contains a deed to a parcel of land that was part of my grandfather Harold's property. And I know that Sylvia has been pulling county land records for the past week and a half." He smiled very slightly. "Cumberland County is a small place." "It is," Russell said. "I'd like to talk to you about the history of that document, about why it was hidden, and about what I'm prepared to offer you in exchange for it." Sylvia put down her coffee cup. "Mr. Caldwell, before we go any further, I want to be clear that any documents recovered from Mr. Morrow's property are his legal property, and any claims arising from those documents are being actively researched and have not been resolved. This is not a negotiation about surrendering documentation. It's a preliminary conversation." Caldwell absorbed this without blinking. "Of course." He looked back at Russell. "Your grandfather was a stubborn man. I say that with some respect. He and my grandfather Harold had a disagreement in 1961, a business disagreement, over a land transaction. Harold believed the transaction was not conducted in good faith. Clarence believed differently. He opened his hands. The dispute was never resolved in court. Harold chose not to pursue it. Clarence chose to hold on to what he had, and then he died, and it was buried, and everyone moved on. My grandfather wrote a note," Russell said, "on the back of the deed. He wrote that Harold sold the land and bought it back dirty, that witnesses were bought." Caldwell's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a very slight tightening. "Your grandfather was an emotional man. He felt wronged. He put his feelings into writing. Was he wrong?" A pause. "That's a very complicated question. It's a yes or no question." Caldwell looked at him for a moment. Then he shifted forward slightly in his chair. "Mr. Morrow, I'm going to be very direct with you. You are 90 days from losing your family farm. I'm aware of your situation at First Heritage. I sit on that board, as you may know." He said this without apology or menace, simply as fact. "What I'm prepared to offer you is simple. The deed you found is legally ambiguous at best. The transaction it describes was contested at the time and was never registered at the county courthouse. A quiet title action would take years and would cost you money you don't have. In exchange for returning the documents to me, I'm prepared to satisfy your outstanding loan balance completely. The farm stays yours, free and clear, and this whole matter ends quietly." Russell held his gaze. He could feel Sylvia very still beside him. "What's the loan balance?" Sylvia asked. $214,000, Caldwell said, "give or take." "And the development deal you're closing on the eastern parcel," Sylvia said. "The one that includes the 6 acres. What's the timeline on that?" Another fractional pause. "That's not relevant too." "It closes in 45 days, Sylvia said. "I've seen the preliminary filings." She picked up her coffee again. "So what you're offering is $214,000 to clear a claim that, if valid, would be worth considerably more in the context of a $4.2 million sale." The fire crackled. Caldwell looked at Sylvia for a long moment. Then he looked at Russell, and something in his expression changed, the pleasantness receding slightly, something older and harder coming through. "Think carefully, Mr. Morrow," he said. "Think about what you're actually prepared to do with this. Think about what a legal fight costs. Think about your daughter and whether she should be going to college or watching her father spend the next 5 years in court. He paused. I'm offering you a clean resolution. A good resolution. Everything you need. Russell stood up. Sylvia stood with him. I'll think about it, Russell said. They drove back to town in silence for the first few minutes. Then Sylvia said, He's scared. I know. If he wasn't scared, he would have offered less. Or nothing. She looked out the window at the dark fields going by. The deed is real, Russell. I've been through enough county records to be fairly certain. Harold Caldwell sold that parcel to your grandfather in September 1961 in a private transaction that was never recorded at the courthouse, probably because Harold bought it back before Clarence could register it. But Clarence kept the original deed, which means what, legally? It means we have a fight worth having, she said. It also means Franklin Caldwell is going to do everything he can to make that fight impossible. She paused. 2 days after you found the tractor, before you called me, did you tell anyone else about the box? Anyone at all? Russell thought. No, just Dennis. And Dennis hasn't told anyone. Then how did Caldwell know? The question stayed in the truck with them for the rest of the drive. Russell called Dennis from the driveway when he got home. It was 9:15 at night. Did you tell anyone? He asked without preamble. A long pause on the other end. Russell, Dennis. My wife, Dennis said. His voice had changed, slower, heavier. I told Carol I thought it wasn't a big deal. I thought, Carol works at the feed store. I know, Russell, I'm sorry. I didn't think the Caldwells owned the feed store. The silence that followed was the kind that damages things. I'm sorry, Dennis said again. He sounded like he meant it, which didn't help as much as it should have. Okay, Russell said, and hung up. He sat in the truck in the dark driveway for a while. Through the kitchen window he could see the light on and the shape of Paige moving around inside, probably doing homework. He thought about his grandfather hiding the tractor. He thought about the note. The ground keeps secrets better than people do. He was beginning to understand what that meant. The following week arrived like a fist. On Monday, Russell received a letter from First Heritage Bank, not a standard notice, but a formal acceleration notice, citing a technical default in a subsection of his loan agreement related to property alterations without prior bank approval. Draining the pond, it turned out, qualified as a property alteration. Sylvia read the letter and was very quiet for a moment. This is not a coincidence, she said.
I know.
They're trying to compress your timeline. If they can accelerate the note, you don't have 90 days, you might have 30. Can they do that? They can try, she said. Whether it holds up is another question, but fighting it takes time and money, and they know that. She set the letter down. Franklin Caldwell is not a stupid man. He's going to make this expensive and exhausting and hope you break before he does. What Sylvia did not say, but what both of them understood, was that Caldwell had more resources for this kind of fight than Russell did. He had the bank. He had lawyers on retainer. He had 60 years of relationships in Cumberland County. What Russell had was a deed, a map, and his grandfather's handwritten note. On Wednesday, Paige came home from school quieter than usual. She sat at the kitchen table with her homework open in front of her, but not doing it, turning her pencil end over end. Somebody said something, Russell said. It wasn't a question. She looked up. Haley Caldwell, in the hallway at school. She said. Paige stopped, set down her pencil. She said her grandfather was going to make sure we lost the farm. She said it like it was already decided. She looked at her father with those steady eyes. Is it? Russell sat down across from her. He thought carefully before he spoke, the way he'd tried to think carefully about everything he said to Paige since her mother left, since he'd learned that the things you say to your children become part of the architecture of who they are. No, he said, it's not decided. What did you find in that tractor? He hadn't told her. He'd been trying to protect her, to keep the weight off her for as long as possible. But looking at her now, the set of her jaw, the steadiness in her eyes, he recognized the look. It was the look his grandfather had in the one good photograph Russell owned of him. The look of someone who can carry more than you think. He told her all of it, the deed, the map, the note, Caldwell's offer, the acceleration notice, Sylvia's assessment. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. Great Grandpa Clarence hid the tractor on purpose, she said. Yes, so that the deed would stay safe. That's what I think. And Grandpa Harold sold the land fair, and then took it back dirty. She was repeating his grandfather's words. What does that mean? How do you sell something and take it back dirty? I think, Russell said slowly, that he found a way to get the county recorder's office to refuse to register the deed. Maybe bribing someone. Maybe calling in a favor. Without the deed being recorded at the courthouse, the sale doesn't exist officially. Your great-great-grandfather couldn't prove he owned the land, and Harold Caldwell denied the sale ever happened. But he kept the original deed. He did. Paige picked up her pencil again. She tapped it against the table in a steady rhythm, so the deed is proof. But proof only matters if someone believes it. That's about right. And the people who have to believe it are in the county courthouse. Or a court, yes, she thought for another moment. Dad, 60 years ago. When great-great-grandpa Clarence had a problem with the Caldwells and took it to the county recorder, they shut him down, right? She looked up. Because the Caldwells had people there, most likely. Do they still? Russell blinked. He hadn't thought about it quite that directly. Probably not the same people, so maybe the problem isn't the deed. Maybe the problem is finding the right place to bring it. She went back to her homework. You should call someone bigger than the county courthouse. He sat with that for a while. That evening he called Sylvia and told her what Paige had said. A long pause on the other end. She's 17. Yeah, she's smarter than both of us. Another pause. She's right. If the county system is compromised, if Caldwell has enough influence at the local level to obstruct a quiet title action, we need to think about federal, or at minimum, state. She was already moving, he could tell, the sound of her voice sharpened. There's also another angle, the development deal. The Lexington Group, if they're purchasing land that's under a legitimate title dispute and they're not disclosed of that dispute, they have standing to sue Caldwell for fraud. That's a whole different kind of pressure. You think they don't know? I think Franklin Caldwell is very careful about what he discloses, Sylvia said. And I think a phone call from a Kentucky property attorney to the Lexington Group's legal team tomorrow morning might be very illuminating. The call changed things. The Lexington Development Group, Meridian Land Partners, LLC, had a legal team out of Louisville that took the call from Sylvia with the intense, focused attention of people who had suddenly been told that a $4 million acquisition might be built on a contested title. By that afternoon, they had put the closing on hold pending a title review. By the following morning, they had contacted Cumberland County's Circuit Court clerk to request a records search. By Friday, word had gotten back to Franklin Caldwell. Russell was at the hardware store when he heard the first version of it, the small-town telegraph. The way news moves through a place like Harlan's Creek. Person to person, slightly distorted at each step but fundamentally intact. The development deal was stalled. Caldwell was furious. His attorneys had called Sylvia's office 3 times. He was in the parking lot loading bags of fence staples into his truck when a black Ford pickup pulled in beside him and the window came down. Behind the wheel was a man he didn't recognize at first, younger than Franklin, maybe 45, with the Caldwell jawline and a suit jacket over a flannel shirt that looked like a costume. Warren Philip Caldwell, Franklin's son. Russell placed him after a moment, had seen him at the feed store years ago, hadn't spoken to him. Mr. Morrow, Warren said. His voice didn't have his father's smoothness. It had edges. I think you need to understand what you're doing here. I think I understand it fine, Russell said. He kept loading fence staples. You're not just fighting my father. You're fighting everything this family has built in this county for 150 years. You're fighting the bank that holds your note. You're fighting the feed store where you buy your grain. You're fighting the people who give out agricultural loans in this county, who sit on the water board, who know the county judge. Warren leaned slightly out the window. You don't win this fight, Mr. Morrow. You just decide how bad you want to lose. Russell set down the last bag and turned to face him fully. Your great-grandfather cheated mine, he said. He bought witnesses. He blocked a legitimate deed from being recorded. And your grandfather Franklin has been sitting on land that doesn't legally belong to him for 60 years. He held Warren Caldwell's gaze. I'm not fighting your family's history. I'm trying to correct it. There's a difference. Warren stared at him for a moment. Something worked in his jaw. Then he said, You have a daughter. The words were not a threat, exactly. They were spoken quietly, carefully, but the meaning was unmistakable. Russell felt the cold move through him. He took one step toward the truck. Say that again, he said. Warren Caldwell didn't say it again. He put the truck in reverse and pulled out of the parking lot. Russell stood there until the truck was out of sight. Then he called Sylvia. I need you to document everything, he said. The conversation in my truck, the meeting at the house, everything. And I want everything in writing from this point on. Russell, what happened? He told her. Her silence was different this time, not the silence of thinking, but the silence of anger being held under professional control. I'm calling the State Bar's ethics line tonight, she said. And I'm calling the Kentucky Attorney General's office in the morning. This has gone past property law. That night, Russell couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark and listened to the house, the creak of the old boards, the sound of the wind off the ridge, the distant cry of something in the field. Paige was asleep down the hall. The metal box was locked in Sylvia's office safe. He thought about his grandfather, about the choice Clarence had made 60 years ago, not to fight, not to go to the county recorder and make noise and get buried by the Caldwell machine, but to hide the evidence, to sink it in mud, to wait until the right time or the right man. He thought about whether he was the right man, whether this was the right time. He thought about his father, who had known nothing about the box, or if he had never mentioned it, who had spent 40 years farming this land under the shadow of a debt and a dispute that he may not have fully understood. He thought about Paige's voice, so maybe the problem is finding the right place to bring it. He got up at 2 in the morning and went to the kitchen and sat at the table where the bank letter had sat, where the legal pad with its short list of options had sat. He found a clean sheet of paper and started writing, not a list of options this time, but a letter. A letter to his grandfather, which he would never send, which he wrote in the way that people sometimes talk to the dead when they need to hear themselves think. He wrote about the farm, about what it meant, about Paige and what he wanted for her, about the tractor and the box and what it felt like to hold 60 years of kept faith in his hands. He wrote, I think you knew this day would come. I think you knew someone would drain the pond eventually. You just didn't know who. You just left it for whoever came next. He set down the pen. Outside, the night was very still. The fog was back, low over the fields, drifting through the fence posts. He was the one who had come next. The Attorney General's inquiry opened on a Tuesday, which was also the day the Cumberland County Circuit Court received Sylvia's petition for a quiet title action on behalf of Russell Dale Morrow, citing the 1961 deed and requesting a temporary injunction on the Caldwell land sale pending title resolution. The judge who heard the injunction request was Honorable Margaret Louise Stanton, a 61-year-old circuit judge who had been on the bench for 19 years and who had, over that period, developed a reputation for patience and an absolute intolerance for procedural maneuvering. She read the petition, asked 12 precise questions, and granted the temporary injunction in 40 minutes. The Meridian Land Partners closing did not happen. Franklin Caldwell's attorneys filed 3 motions in the following week. Judge Stanton denied 2 of them on procedural grounds and set a hearing date for the 3rd. Sylvia drove out to the farm to tell Russell in person. She sat at his kitchen table, the same table where the bank letter had sat, where he'd written to his grandfather in the middle of the night and told him what the injunction meant and what came next. This isn't over, she said carefully. A quiet title action can take a year or more. Franklin Caldwell has resources to make this long and expensive. The acceleration notice from the bank is still technically active. We've filed a response, but it's not resolved. But the deal is stopped. For now. Yes. Russell nodded. He was looking out the kitchen window at the back of the property. Where the pond had been, there was now a flat acre of drying mud with a deep drainage trench along the western edge. The tractor sat at the near end of the mud flat, cleaned and chained, waiting to be moved to the barn. "What do you think this is worth?" he asked. "The claim." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. Meridian Land Partners paid for a professional land appraisal as part of their due diligence. The 6 acres, in the context of the development deal, was valued at approximately $640,000, proportional to the overall purchase price. She paused. "That's not necessarily what you'd get in a settlement. But it's what the land is worth in that transaction. $640,000. Russell thought about that. Then, is there a world where this settles? Where Caldwell agrees to something reasonable rather than fight it all the way? Yes, Sylvia said. And I think that world is more likely now than it was a week ago. The AG inquiry complicates his position significantly. It's not a criminal investigation. Not yet, but it raises questions about historical conduct that Franklin Caldwell would very much rather not have publicly examined. She closed her portfolio. I think we'll get a call. The call came on Thursday. It came not from Franklin Caldwell, but from his attorney, a man named Douglas Kent Whitmore, who was polished and careful, and who spoke to Sylvia in the language of settlement negotiation, incremental, hedged, but moving in a clear direction. The final terms, worked out over 10 days of calls and 3 formal sessions, were these. The Caldwell family would acknowledge the validity of the 1961 deed in a private settlement agreement. They would not admit to the specific allegations in Clarence Morrow's note, "Bought it back dirty," but the acknowledgement of the deed was itself an implicit concession, in exchange for Russell agreeing not to pursue the quiet title action through trial, and not to cooperate with any further AG inquiry beyond what was legally required. The Caldwell family would pay $480,000 to Russell Dale Morrow. Russell would also receive a full release of the First Heritage Bank loan, the acceleration notice withdrawn, the balance satisfied from the settlement funds. Sylvia walked him through it 3 times. On the 3rd time, she said, "Russell, this is good. This is more than I expected." He signed the agreement on a Thursday morning in Sylvia's office above the hardware store. The settlement check cleared the following Tuesday. He told Paige that evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, looking at college websites, something she'd started doing quietly, without telling him, in the past few weeks. He sat across from her and laid the bank's release letter on the table between them. She read it. Her face went through several things in quick succession: surprise, then the particular expression of relief that is almost indistinguishable from grief. The way that letting go of a fear you've been carrying for a long time can feel like losing something. "It's done," she said. "The farm's ours. Free and clear." She nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "What are you going to do with the rest of it?" He had thought about this. "Fix the barn. Plant the east field. Set aside what you need for college." He paused. "And something else." She looked up. "I'm going to restore the tractor," he said. "The John Deere. It'll take a while, probably a year, at least. There's a man in London, Kentucky, who does restoration work on old Deeres. I've already called him." He looked at her. "Your great-great-grandfather loved that machine. He used it to keep something safe for 60 years. Seems like it deserves better than sitting in the mud." Paige was quiet. Then she said, "He didn't know it would be you." "No, but he left it anyway. In case..." "Yes." She looked at him with those steady eyes, and in them he saw something that had not been there 6 weeks ago. Not just the steadiness she'd always had, but something settled underneath it. Something that had found its footing. "Okay," she said, and went back to her laptop. Dennis came by on Saturday. He stood at the edge of the old pond bed, the dry, cracked mud flat with the drainage trench along its edge. and didn't say anything for a while. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "About Carol. About what I did. I know. I didn't understand what it was at first." Russell was quiet. He had been working through this for weeks. The anger, the feeling of having been exposed at a moment of maximum vulnerability by the person he'd trusted most. He'd let himself feel it fully, which was the only honest thing to do. "I know you didn't mean harm," he said. "I know that." Dennis looked at him. "Are we okay?" Russell thought about it, not to be dramatic, but because he believed the question deserved an honest answer. "We're working toward it," he said. "We'll get there." Dennis nodded. That was fair. They stood there together, looking at the mudflat where the tractor had been. "You going to plant this?" Dennis asked. "Not this year. Ground's too disrupted. Maybe next spring if it settles right." "What will you put in it?" Russell looked at the acre. Dark soil, long sealed, broken open, full of whatever the deep ground held: minerals, history, the slow chemistry of things preserved in the dark. "Haven't decided yet," he said. "Something that lasts." The tractor restoration took 14 months. The man in London, Robert Cole Hadley, 67 years old, who had been working on John Deere machinery since he was 16, called it the best preserved 730 he'd ever seen. Despite the corrosion, the submersion in anaerobic mud had actually protected certain components from oxidation, and the engine block, once cleaned and machined, was fundamentally sound. Russell drove down to pick it up on a September Saturday, pulling a flatbed trailer behind the truck. Paige came with him. She was 18 now, headed to the University of Kentucky in the spring on a partial scholarship she'd won on her own, the rest covered by the settlement fund Russell had set aside. Robert Hadley walked them around the completed tractor in his shop, pointing out the work: new seals, rebuilt carburetor, reconditioned magneto, fresh paint in the original John Deere 2-cylinder, green and yellow. The tires were new. The seat had been rebuilt from photographs. On the side of the hood, where the model designation was stamped, Hadley had polished the metal to a clear, bright finish. John Deere 730. Russell ran his hand along the hood, the same way he had in the mud. The same gesture, but this time the metal was clean and warm from the shop lights. "She'll run," Hadley said. "I took her out this morning. Starts on the second pull." On the drive home, the tractor strapped down on the trailer behind them. Paige was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Do you think he knew, Grandpa Clarence? Do you think he knew that hiding the tractor was also saving it?" Russell considered that. "I think he was saving the deed. The tractor was just the best hiding place he could think of. But you're going to keep it." "Yes, so it worked out for the tractor too." She leaned her head against the window, watching the Kentucky hills go by, the old ridges, the September light catching the first color in the hardwoods. "I think that's kind of beautiful, that he buried the thing he loved most to protect something he believed in." Russell drove. The trailer hummed behind them on the highway. He was a stubborn man, he said. That's what everyone who knew him said. Good stubborn or bad stubborn. The kind that knows the difference between what you're owed and what you've earned. He paused, the kind that would rather wait than surrender. Paige was quiet for a moment, then, "That's you too, you know." He glanced at her. She was looking at the road ahead now, her profile calm against the window light. "Maybe," he said. The tractor went into the barn that evening. Russell backed the trailer up to the wide barn doors, and he and Dennis, who had come over without being asked, the way he always had, the way Russell suspected he always would, eased it down the ramps and into the center of the barn floor, where the old overhead light caught it fully. It was extraordinary. 14 months of work and 62 years of waiting, and the machine stood in the barn the way it must have stood in 1961, before Clarence had driven it to the back of the property on a cold November night and eased it into the black water of the pond, green and yellow and solid, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled. Dennis stood back and crossed his arms and looked at it for a long time. "Your grandfather would lose his mind," he said finally. Russell laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and unclenches something on the way out. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. He'd try to drive it immediately, Russell said. He'd try to plow something. He'd plow the whole east field at 10 o'clock at night. They stood there smiling at the tractor in the light. Dennis cleared his throat. "Russell, I need you to know what I did telling Carol. I think about it every day. I know you do. It almost cost you everything." "It didn't, but it could have." Russell turned to look at him. Dennis was staring at the tractor, his jaw set, the sunburned back of his neck creased with tension. 51 years old and looking like a man waiting for a punishment that hadn't come. "Dennis," Russell said. "Look at me." Dennis looked at him. "We're okay," Russell said, not working toward it the way he'd said before. "We're okay. The real thing arrived at last, you hear me?" Dennis held his gaze. Something in his face shifted, released. He nodded once, the sharp nod of a man who doesn't trust himself to speak. They walked out of the barn together, leaving the tractor in the light. The east field was planted the following May, the first crop in 7 years. Russell put in corn, a shorter season variety suited to the elevation and the late spring frosts that still came off the ridge some years. He worked the ground himself with a rented planter and the kind of focused physical attention that had always felt to him like the most honest form of thinking. The wet acre, the old pond bed, was still bare. The drainage trench had done its job well. The ground was drier than it had ever been in Russell's lifetime, and the soil that had been underwater for decades was dark and dense with organic matter, richer than almost anything else on the property. It would be extraordinary growing ground once it settled fully. He wasn't in a hurry. The farm was his. The mortgage was gone. Paige was in Lexington, studying environmental science with the particular intensity of someone who has found the thing they're meant to do. She called every Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesdays too, and in her voice he could hear the shape of a life being built, not in spite of what had happened, but because of it, in some indirect and unmappable way. He stood at the edge of the wet acre one evening in early May, the corn coming up green and straight in the east field behind him, the sky going gold over the ridge. The ground was quiet. The mud had dried to good dark earth. There was nothing here now that was hidden. No machine, no box, no deed kept in the dark waiting for the right time. Everything that had been buried had been brought up. He thought about what he'd said to Dennis, something that lasts. He crouched down and picked up a handful of the dark soil, felt its weight in his hand, the particular heaviness of good ground, dense with life, with the compressed history of everything it had held and given back. He let it fall through his fingers slowly. In the morning, he decided he would call the extension agent at the University of Kentucky. Ask about perennial crops. Native plantings, maybe. Something that wouldn't need replanting every year. That would hold the soil and grow deeper roots with each season. Something that lasted. He stood up, brushed his hands on his jeans, and walked back toward the house through the long evening light. The barn was behind him, its doors standing open, and in the dim interior he could see the shape of the John Deere 730, green and yellow, patient and still, keeping watch over the land it had come home to. Somewhere, a whippoorwill started up in the tree line. The corn stood straight in the east field. Mora Hollow was still here.